Cantu Porto by the Prowler. Captain's Log, Journal Entry 1. Cargo and scientific supplies securely stored away in the cargo hold of the Neptune's Library, a scientific and research vessel, which happens to be the very finest in the Queen's Navy. We left port around 9:30 in the a.m., August 13th, year of our Lord, 1888. We set sail on a scientific expedition bound for the Isle of Cantu Porto, a small island off the coast of Costa Rica. From my understanding, when we arrive, we will be the first foreigners to step foot on the island. Having never been explored, I am very excited, but at the same time, not being ashamed to admit, very nervous. This is my first captaincy, and I feel obligated to perform to the best of my abilities, and prove my superiors correct in putting their faith in me and trust for such an important expedition. I am tasked with leading a seaworthy crew of 120, plus a group of 4 of the country's leading scientists and a detachment of Marines to explore the mysterious island of Cantu Porto. The crew looks able of their tasks and willing to do them. Those are my first impressions, anyway. The officers under me, for the most part, seem capable and knowledgeable of their duties, with the exception of 2 young lieutenants who were forced upon me through nepotistic connections. It's not ideal, but it's nothing I can't handle. The first day has been a success, and as I head for bed, I am filled with hope and excitement for what this expedition will bring. Here's hoping for success. Ezekiel Hampton, Captain of Neptune's Library, signing out. Captain's Log, Journal Entry 2, August 15th. Nothing of note since my last entry 2 days ago. The men's spirits are high, and the camaraderie is growing between the crew. A few disciplinary incidents cropped up, but nothing serious. We are on a schedule, and the expedition is going according to plan. Side note, one of the young lieutenants, a Mr. Theodore Radsford, might need some looking out for. He seems a superstitious and incapable fellow. 2 things that could bring disaster to a voyage and crew. I'll put one of the senior officers in charge of the situation. Captain's Log, Journal Entry 3, August 17th. Nothing of note happened yesterday, but today the young Lieutenant Radsford was caught spreading rumors amongst the men that this expedition was cursed. I don't think it worked. We're too early into the voyage, and there's been no signs of this expedition being cursed. I'll have the officers keep an eye on the men in the meantime, but everything seems fine. Mr. Radsford has been relieved of his duties and confined to his quarters until we return to port. Captain's Log, Journal Entry 4, August 18th. Sat down with the lead scientist of the expedition, a Professor Reginald Bartholomew, a truly brilliant man, the top researcher in the entire country, and after a brief conversation with him, I can see why. I sat down with him because I wanted to specifically find out what exactly it was we were to research on the island. He responded, everything. The entire documentation of the island was to be recorded. Plants, rocks, sand, soil, trees, and any living organisms that we come across was to be sampled. Then after the scientific findings were collected, we are to leave a small base camp with 2 of the scientists, a handful of Marines, and a year's worth of supplies to plant our country's flag and take control of the island until we return with more men and supplies. Professor Bartholomew then proceeded to tell me If we find the things he thinks we'll find on the island, then we'll return home as heroes and become famous men for the things we discover. I quickly pointed out, that's all well and good, but I'm not in it for fame. I serve only Queen and country. That's where my loyalty ends. I wished the professor a pleasant evening and went to bed. Captain's Log, Journal Entry 5, August 20th. A panic among the crew has broken out. Bosun's mate Devers was found hanging from the crow's nest with a sign hanging around his neck that read, "Return home. The ship and voyage is cursed. Turn around now before it is too late." An investigation has taken place for this ghastly crime. I put the sergeant of arms, a grizzled veteran by the name of William Smythe, in charge, though I have my suspicions of who carried out this egregious act. My suspicions were proven correct when I sent the sergeant of arms and 2 other officers down to check on the young disgraced Lieutenant Radsford in his quarters. But when they called on him, he was not there. The lock was broken and the door was left ajar. There's no sign of the young Mr. Radsford, but we must find him before he sets the crew off into hysterics. Wish us luck, for I fear the future of our voyage depends on finding him. Captain's Log, Journal Entry 6, August 21st. Sadly, I must report another death. The sergeant-at-arms was found dead in his bed, his throat slit from ear to ear, with a message above his head, written in blood, to beware. Return at all costs. The officers are reporting whispers from the men in their sections that the ship is cursed. This must be stopped quickly before the ship is thrown into chaos. There's only so many places Radsford could be hiding. He must be found and quartered before it's too late. Captain's Log, Journal Entry 7, August 23rd. The past 2 days, me and my officers partook in a painstakingly desperate search for the mad, disgraced Lieutenant Radsford. But I am happy to report he was found by young Master Jacobs, a fine lad. Reminder to put in recommendations for a promotion. The crazed Radsford was found in the corner of the bowels of the ship, feasting on rat carcasses, and surrounded by pieces of flesh of his victims. Was he also feasting on his victims as well? I shudder to think of such depravity. His body is also completely covered in carvings of his flesh that read, "Cursed, Doomed, Turn Back," and warning. Truly a disturbed individual. Does he suffer from scurvy? Or was he simply mad before stepping foot on this vessel? Whatever the case, he will face trial tomorrow, out on the upper deck for his crimes. He will be made an example of. We can't afford any more setbacks on this important expedition. Captain's Log, Journal Entry 8, August 24th. The trial of Lieutenant Theodore Radsford commenced, and he was sentenced to death for his crimes by his peers, and I carried out the sentence. He was hanged from the main mast of the ship, 9 o'clock, the morning of August 24th, in the year of our Lord, 1888. I pray after this we can put this craziness behind us and get back on schedule. I just hope the crew has not been lost. Captain's Log, Journal Entry 9, September 18th. Apologies for not keeping a consistent update to this journal, but it has been quite the task to keep the crew together. Last night, a mutiny of sorts was squashed by my master of the boat, Jedediah Hollingsworth. He and a few of the Marines were making their nightly patrols and came across a small group of crazed men trying to overtake the ship. These turncoats were foaming at the mouth, talking of a curse. Disciples of the mad Rasford, no doubt. They were quickly gagged and will be put on trial later on today. It will be swift. Their fates are sealed. Mutineers hang in the Queen's Navy. On a personal note, it's my birthday today. Waking up and hearing of a mutiny wasn't the greatest of gifts. So many setbacks have befelled this expedition. Will I live to see another birthday? I hope so. I'll try and keep a more consistent entry to my journals. Captain's Log, Journal Entry 10, October 13th. It has been over a month since my last entry. I would apologize, but there have been reasons for my absence. Keeping the crew together has been a difficult task. Multiple mutinies have transpired since my last entry. From more of the cursed believers to a band of men who were ex-privateers, not content because there was no loot to be held at the end of this voyage. And that's what happens when you fill the ranks of your navy with ex-pirates. Reminder to formally complain to my superiors when we return to port. I know my journal entry of this voyage has not been consistently updated, but Professor Bartholomew has been keeping an updated one of his own, so no fear. Hopefully there are no more setbacks. I believe if everything goes smoothly from here on out, we will reach the Isle of Cantu Porto within a month. Tomorrow is All Hallows Eve. Wish us luck on the night where the dead supposedly return to the living. Captain's Log, Journal Entry 11, November 21st. Joyous news. I was awoken at dawn from shouts on deck of land. I jumped out of bed and ran out on deck. I could hear shouts from the crow's nest of "Land ho!" I retrieved my binoculars from the casing and spotted the white sandy beaches of Cantu Porto. Finally, I exclaimed to myself, sighing a deep breath of relief. We've finally made it. It was a grueling journey, but we're finally here. Updated numbers: 100 crew members, 4 scientists, and a detachment of 50 naval marines. Supplies are still well stocked, and the remaining men's spirits have been lifted since seeing the land. Myself and my fellow officers are to meet with Professor Bartholomew and his team of scientists and put together an expedition party to search for the island in the morning. Things are finally starting to look up. Captain's Log, Journal Entry 12, November 22nd. History was made this morning. As we came to shore and stepped foot on land, we became the first foreigners to arrive on the island in its history. I personally planted our country's flag, declaring it part of the empire. What a moment. We then set up a base camp a few feet inland from the beach, then accompanied the science team on their search for new specimens. I'd say the first day was a success. Countless new species of plants and minerals were discovered, not to mention many exotic animals that the civilized world had never encountered before was found. Professor Bartholomew was very pleased with the findings, so I'm very pleased as well. Mark the first day off as a success. The expedition may go flawlessly after all. Captain's Log, Journal Entry 13, November 23rd. An interesting turn of events transpired today. While the second day of the scientific documentation was taking place, one of the scientists, a man by the name of Timothy Scott, and his marine escort came across a native. It was shocking at first, because we didn't come across any signs of human life the previous day. The native was skittish at first, but after a while, a form of communication was developed, and he took us back to his tribe. When we arrived, we met the tribal elders and chief. The people seemed warm and friendly, somewhat intelligent, but what can you expect from people without the teaching of a modernized world. Communication has been difficult, but Professor Bartholomew and his team have figured out a way they believe is working to communicate. Let's hope they are correct. Before leaving, we decide to leave Professor Bartholomew and his team, along with a few Marines, to stay at the village, to develop a rapport with the villagers. The villagers seemed eager and willing at the idea as well. I'm sure they're just as interested in us as we are of them. I told Professor Bartholomew to reach out as much as he could about the tribe and try to get the confidence of the chief. These are exciting times we find ourselves in. I can't wait till tomorrow. Captain's Log, Journal Entry 14, November 25th. All hope is lost. This will be my last entry into this journal. As dawn approached, myself and a contingent of men embarked back to the village, filled with eagerness to hear of the goings-on in the village from Professor Bartholomew and his team, hoping for continued success in the relationship of our peoples. As the sun rose and we entered the village, we were greeted warmly by the chief and the villagers, but I did not see the research team, no sign of Professor Bartholomew or his men. I communicated to the chief, trying to find the whereabouts of the team. He began to laugh, then in a broken form of English, said, "Bartholomew," and motioned to me to step forward. I walked a few paces forward to a simmering cauldron. A couple of older tribe women were stirring what looked like boiling meat and some kind of fruits or vegetables. After a few stirs, a head turned over, and as it did, the chief once again said, "Bartholomew," then laughed, and I pointed. It was the professor. His hair and most of his flesh were boiled off. I stood in complete shock. None of my men could see what was transpiring over my shoulder. I tried to give the orders to arms, but the words wouldn't come out. By the time I shook the fear and gave the order to attack, my men were surrounded and engulfed. I managed to run through the chief with my saber and run back towards the base camp on shore. The tribe was obviously working on a plan of attack throughout the night, because as I approached base camp, shouting to prepare for attack, I saw in horror my men being overrun and massacred by a contingent of tribal warriors. I barely escaped with my life and made it to the lifeboat. I rowed back to the ship and alerted the remaining men on board. To my surprise, a group of men just stood in place and gave up, awaiting their carnivorous fate, while others shouted, cursed, and jumped off the side of the ship and fled. There I stood, with 50 of Her Majesty's finest men ready to fight for our very existence. In the distance we could see large bonfires being lit on the beach, the cries of our fellow men ringing out as they were being cooked alive, frightening echoes in the tropical air as we readied for the boarding party of cannibalistic tribal warriors. We mowed down wave after wave of the cannibal tribesmen as they scaled over the railing, but in the end we were outnumbered. Myself and 3 Marines were all that were left. When the last of the Marines fell, I managed to slice my way through a few of the warriors and barricaded myself in my captain's quarters. I can hear my men outside the doors being eaten alive. Their cries of agony are hard to listen to. I just remembered what day it is, November the 25th. Now, we don't celebrate the day, but I know our allies in the colonies celebrate a holiday called Thanksgiving. The irony and humor did not escape me, even in this moment. There's not much time left. It won't be long now. They're breaking down the doors to my cabin as I write this. To my family, I love you more than words can express. I hope this letter finds you well. Please remember me in happier times. To my superiors, I tried my best. They're almost in now. As the saying goes, a good captain always goes down with the ship. Into the Ocean by iloveallthebacon. I told them I didn't want to go out on the boat. I'm terrified of the ocean. They all know this. Why did I let them convince me? And now, as expected, as always feared, I find myself treading water. It takes every single ounce of my being to try to remain calm. Keep breathing. Don't think of the bottomless empty space beneath you. Don't think of the cold nothingness surrounding you. The water feels thick against my paddling limbs as I look around me, but there is no land in sight. The boat is completely underwater. Don't think of the unknowns. Don't look at the dead bodies of your friends floating around you. The only noise is the lapping of ocean water against my body. But the minuscule sound is almost deafening compared to the complete silence of my surroundings. I force myself to breathe slowly. I'm wearing a life jacket. It should at least keep my head above the water when my legs get tired. After all, the life jackets are keeping my friends afloat. My biggest fear isn't even the ocean anymore. I'm most afraid of whatever has been dragging my friends' bodies underwater, one by one, over the past few hours. The Sailor by Sid Krishna Shiva. On that particular day, I ventured to the beach alone, seeking solace amidst the gentle embrace of the wind. The sun was already beginning its descent, and the majority of beachgoers had departed, leaving only a handful behind. I found myself reluctant to leave. The tranquil atmosphere offered a sense of contentment that I had rarely experienced, even in the comfort of my own home. As the day waned, 3 teenage boys, the last of the beach's occupants, abandoned a castle they had laboriously constructed. One of them remarked, "And the spirit must have departed by now," leaving me perplexed. Soon, I became the sole occupant of the beach. Minutes later, piercing screams pierced the air, originating from the sea. The day's haze obscured the surroundings, making it challenging to identify the source of distress. Instinctively, I headed towards the water, where I spotted a fisherman some distance away, urgently calling for aid. As both an adept swimmer and someone inherently inclined to assist, I swam toward his boat. The vessel appeared to be on the brink of sinking, likely due to a breach below its waterline. However, as my hand clasped onto his, an uncanny sensation enveloped me. In a matter of moments, my pleas for help echoed across the water. Despite my cries, no saviors emerged on the horizon. The clamor persisted, and as I gazed upon the fragmented piece of glass aboard the boat, I was confronted with an inexplicable sight. The reflection staring back at me was not my own. Instead, it bore the likeness of the distressed fisherman. Though my thoughts, emotions, and self-awareness remained intact, the mirror revealed a visage that was not mine. A month has passed since that bewildering occurrence, and I find myself trapped within this surreal predicament, forever trapped in the fisherman's form and endlessly summoning help. However, a glimmer of hope has emerged. A young boy has finally perceived my plight and is approaching me. Lights out on the boat. Author unknown. The night was perfect. A moonlit sky filled with stars, soothing music, amazing Caribbean food, and my two favorite people, my best friend Thomas and my girlfriend Sarah. I planned to propose to her tonight. Thomas's parents co-owned a country club with other business partners. They funded these boat parties every season out on the Gulf. While the rest of the patrons were inside, I sat outside with Thomas, going over my proposal. "Sarah, will you do me the honor?" "No, that's not good." "You're overthinking it, Dean," he said, placing his hand on my shoulder. "It's been 3 years. I see the way she looks at you. You'll get it right, and she'll say yes." I smile and nod in agreement. I hope so. We hear a commotion going on inside and see people beginning to move towards the windows on the other end. "Looks like things are getting good in there without us," Thomas said. "Come on." As we walked towards the entrance, Sarah came rushing at us frantically. "Guys, something is wrong." I could see the fear in her eyes. I knew she was serious. "What happened?" I asked. Sarah began crying. I don't know. They appeared out of nowhere." I looked inside, and I could see everyone looking overboard and talking to each other. "Who's they?" Sarah hugged me and looked at me with tears pouring down her face. She said it so faintly, as if her heart just wouldn't allow the words to come out. "The bodies." Immediately after, the power on the boat went out. I could hear everyone inside begin to panic, some of them screaming, others asking for answers. Security tried to calm everyone, but to no avail. The captain spoke on the intercom. "We are having some technical difficulties right now. Don't worry, we'll be all right. Arriving shortly. Seated." The intercom lost connection, and the boat began to shake, shifting back and forth as if it were a toy and someone was grabbing hold of it. The panic increased, and we ran inside. I tried to call for help, but there was no signal. We were several miles from the mainland. If the ship sank right then, it would have been at least 30 minutes before help arrived. I ran towards the other side to see the bodies. To my horror, it looked as if the entire Gulf on that side was filled with bodies, and the mainland was gone. Thomas and Sarah joined me, and we witnessed what looked like something from a movie. It was like we were on a different planet. The boat tilted upward, and people fell into the water. I tried holding on to Sarah, but she fell as well. "No!" I screamed, ready to jump after her. I heard what sounded like a wail. Thomas grabbed my shoulder, frozen with fear. "Dean? Dean! The ocean! Look at the ocean! I don't remember it having eyes." He was right. I couldn't fathom what it was, but it was staring right at us. Shied Bones by the Prowler. Let me tell you about the story of Shied Bones. A simple description would be he was a bully, just a ruthless son of a bitch who didn't care about anything or anyone but himself. But a more complex description would involve the part where he's also a murderer to boot. Shied was a sailor, tall as a church steeple and as wide as a brick shithouse. Come to think of it, he smelled like one, too. I first met the bastard on the Brandywine, a cargo ship going from Pennsylvania to New Orleans. I was the ship's cook, and he was one of the deckhands. Two things stood out when I first met Shied. He was big, and he was an asshole, like I said. As first impressions go, he didn't give two shits about giving off a good one to anyone. He was like a bull in a china shop, purposely elbowing his way past fellow crew members, acting like he was the top cock around the ship wherever he went, and always picking on crew members he perceived as weak. On this trip he picked a particular tiny fellow named James Whitley to pick on. James was a tiny, scrawny lad. Think of a toothpick with legs. To be honest, the lad probably had no reason to be a deckhand on a cargo ship, but I'm not going to question how a fella makes a living. Even though this was my first voyage with the two, I had been on enough voyages in my life to know this wasn't going to be a smooth sail to New Orleans. I've been a sailor all my life, and by the time of this first encounter with Shied, I was already 48 years old. These sea-weathered eyes had seen a lot, and I knew that when a bully like Shied picked a target, then that target was in for a rough journey. It didn't take too long for the first encounter on the voyage. It happened the first night during dinner. I served some piping hot chowder to the boys, with a ration of bread, and after I served everyone, I fixed myself a bowl and went topside to eat in the cool night sea breeze. I set my bones down up against the port side rail and began to eat. I looked to my right and saw tiny James eating his grub. He noticed me and shook his head and said the chowder was delicious. I thanked him and we continued eating our meal. After a minute or so, I heard a big booming voice from James' direction say, "Hey, kid, that chowder be looking real tasty. How about you give me the rest of your food?" It was Shied, standing over James holding his own bowl of chowder, looking down at James with a smart-assy smirk plastered across his face. James hesitantly replied no. His voice trembled as he uttered the word. "You have your own bowl of food. Leave me alone, Shied." James continued. That took balls from the lad, I thought, but I knew it wasn't going to end well. Before I could finish my thought, Shied was on James like a lioness on one of them zebras. He ripped the bowl out of James' hands, and then he kicked James right in the stomach, hard as he could. James crumpled into a ball, writhing in pain. Shied stood there and shouted, "Next time I tell you I want something, that means I effing want it, boy," and walked off laughing. I sat there for a moment, then got up and walked over to the kid and handed him the rest of my food. I told him to hang in there. I felt sorry for the kid. Like I said, it was only night one, and it was already bad for the kid. Like I knew it would, it only got worse from there. Picking on James daily, taking his food nightly. These abuses went on for weeks. Me and the others tried warning the officers what was happening, and that it wasn't going to end well. They always would say, "We'll take care of it," but they never did. Truth be told, I think they were scared of old Shy Bones, as well as the others. Hell, as I sit here in my ripe old age telling you this tale, I'm not afraid to admit I was even a little frightened of Shied. He was just plumb crazy. Even after months of abuse, some genius gave night watch to James and Shied, those two together, up on deck alone. It just didn't sit well with me. I had a very bad feeling as my head hit the pillow. Not long into the night my fears were realized, when shouts of "man overboard" could be heard from topside. We all quickly ran up to see what was the matter. Scheid was standing there seeming out of breath. Then he pointed to the railing and said James had fallen over. We rushed over to the railing to try and spot James, but we couldn't see him. We lit every lantern on board and still couldn't spot him. I could hear one of the officers shout, "What's this?" We all rushed over to the railing. He was standing by. He shined his lantern over the railing and the deck boards right under it. It was covered in blood, big pools of blood. Scheid was questioned and said James was walking over near the railing. He slipped, hit his head, and before he could reach him, he fell over the side of the ship. An officer pointed out that Scheid's knife wasn't in its sheath, but he had an answer for that too. He said he had handed it to James to cut some extra rope that was hanging from one of the masts. If you ask me, the story was a crock of shit. But there was no witnesses. Scheid was detained and questioned when we docked in New Orleans, but no one saw anything, so he was released. I personally think he finally killed the poor boy, but there was nothing I could do about it, so that was that. When we returned to Pennsylvania, I tried to forget about Scheid, James, and the ill-fated voyage on the Brandywine. I had taken plenty of jobs on plenty of ships since then. I had heard the Brandywine was sold, and didn't know what had become of big old Shy Bones. I didn't really want to know, to be honest. Then, about 10 years after the voyage on the Brandywine, I took a job as a cook on a whaling ship called the Ocean's Revenge. We were to sail all along the East Coast for a few months' time, catching as many whales as we could. As I stood amongst the crew for orientation and roll call, I could hear a big burly voice to the left of me shout, "I'm right here!" I looked over. I saw it was Scheid Bones, but he hadn't answered to the name Scheid. He was going by the name Brom Johnson. But I know it was him. There's no mistaking that big bastard. Doesn't matter. It's been 10 years or not. You can't forget a killer like that. I guess he changed his name so he could get work, or escape the unwanted attention of the incident. Nobody wants to crew with a suspected murderer, after all. As roll call ended and we were dispersing to our stations, ready to set sail, I ran into him. He said pardon me, and acted like he didn't even recognize me. Now I know it's been 10 years, and I know I've gotten a little more grayer and frailer, but I hadn't changed that much. I said pardon me as well, and started walking towards the galley to get prepared for dinner. But when I turned back, I noticed him staring at me, mumbling something to himself. He recognized me. I knew it was him. He obviously doesn't want the attention of what happened 10 years ago. I made my way below deck and the galley and kitchen and started getting things ready. As I started preparing the meal, however, I noticed this space had looked awfully familiar. I stood there for what seemed to be forever, trying to rack my brain. Then that damn Scheid Bones popped into my head and broke my concentration. That's it, I thought. That's why I know this kitchen. I'm on the effing Brandywine. I know this ship looked familiar standing on the deck. New name, new paint, but this is her. There's no doubt about it. This is the Brandywine. I asked the quartermaster, who's been with the ship for quite a few voyages, and asked him if this indeed had been the Brandywine. And when I asked him, his face turned sullen and serious, and whispered, "Shh, be quiet. Don't say that name." I looked at him, dumbfounded. I assure you, and asked why not. He proceeded to tell me that the ship was haunted, and that the Brandywine was eventually sold and given a new name and painted a new color, because people had begun to refuse to sail on her because of the odd, eerie things that happened on each voyage. He swore me to secrecy. He didn't want this getting out and frightening the crew. I agreed and went on about my business. Haunted. I chuckled. I don't know about that. I've never been one of those superstitious sailors, but it was quite eerie back on the Brandywine again, with old Shy Bones, I must admit. I didn't have time to dwell on such things for long, however. I had a dinner to prepare for. Nice hot beef stew with a roll was on the menu tonight, and dinner came quickly. I served the lads and then went topside to eat in the cool sea breeze. I sat my tired bones down up against the railing and ate my stew, and I looked over to my right. I could make out Shide in the shadows, his face barely being illuminated by the glow of his match as he lit his pipe. It was strange, though. He looked shaken as he struck the match. I could have sworn I saw big Shide Bones' hand tremble as he put the match to his pipe. Never thought I'd see that sight. I continued watching him in the corner of my eye as he stood up against the railing, eating his stew. He seemed strange acting. He kept looking over his shoulder like he was hearing something. Voices, sounds, I don't know, but he was acting very peculiar. I shrugged it off, finished my meal, and went to bed. I had a dream about James when I fell asleep, and how Shy tormented that poor lad. Sometime in the night, we were all awakened by a blood-curdling scream. I quickly got out of bed and rushed up deck. There was already a crowd gathered around the center mast. I pushed my way through the crowd to see what the commotion was, and hanging by a rope tied around his ankle was Shide, or as the fellows were saying, Brom. Whatever the case, it was him, and he was dead. Just hanging there with an old rusty knife jammed into his stomach. They cut the rope off his foot and laid him across the deck. His face was stretched out in pain, a face I'll never forget. Then someone pulled the old knife from his stomach. I heard someone say, "There's a name carved on that handle." I asked what the name was, and the reply chilled my bones. Still does to this very day. The name that was carved on the old knife's handle was Shide Bones. I would like to give a heartfelt thank you to the special friends of the channel for your overwhelming generosity. If you would like to support the channel, the link is below in the description. Also, please send me your stories and poems to duchessofdarkness27@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at duchess.ofdarkness and Twitter at duchessofdarkn2. I want to thank all my listeners for your kindness, your encouragement, and your support. It means the world to me. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.